All right, so let's talk about the mental health crisis and where it came from, how did it happen, what do we do about it. So I just want to start with some stats. According to ChatGPT, 7 to 8% of adults will experience a major depressive episode this year. Every year, about, again, 1 in 10, approximately, American adults will experience a major depressive episode, which is concerning because if you ever have experienced such a thing, it's crippling. It zaps your will to live. It zaps the beauty, the color out of life. In my opinion, this is one of the darkest experiences we can have. And it's necessary to address this, to understand what is going on right now. How did this happen? And what do we do about it? So, and then 19% of adults in America will experience some sort of anxiety disorder in any given year. So that's 1 in 5. And anxiety is also a very crippling disease. Your mind is just ruminating on fears about the future, of how things could go, and especially in these, dare I say, apocalyptic times, there's a lot that we could be anxious about. If we do not know how to navigate the experience of anxiety, if we don't know how to navigate the experience of depression, these things are terrifying. They're scary. Um, yeah, terrifying. And I don't think that's a hyperbole. It's also really painful to see the people that you love in that degree of suffering, that degree of bleakness, of panic, fear. And it's something that is workable, that can be addressed through practice, through different ways of seeing ourselves, the world, the mind, seeing our stories, seeing our place in the world, understanding what it means to be a human being, not just falling for the culturally conditioned narratives that we've been spoon fed by the powers that be. And that's not to be conspiratorial, but like there is a certain way of seeing things that has been fed to us to the point where now basically everyone thinks, oh, it's objectively this way because everyone thinks so. That's not true. Just because everyone thinks a certain thing does not make it true. As the Buddha would say, ehipasiko, come see for yourself what's real. Sit in meditation, do these practices, let the mind slow down so that you can see clearly what is real and what is not. So, the mental health crisis is a crisis of perspective. It is a crisis of ways of seeing, specifically solidifying and embodying certain ways of seeing that are inducing states of suffering, panic, bleakness, hopelessness. This includes, and I think is directly related to, these conditioned beliefs about what is real. Specifically in the West, we have this notion that materialism, that this is more real than my imagination, for instance. We have this duality where reality is this, and then everything else is not really real. It's just in your head. It's just in your head. It's not really real. If we really explore this, we can see where the stories, our imagination, and what we call reality are almost inseparable. Because the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves form and inform our experience and alters what we pick up on through the senses through perception. So what's the difference between our imagined story of ourselves, the world, our place in it, and what we call reality? For instance, is science not just a story that uses replicatable studies to say this is objectively what's real? Knowing also that science changes dramatically through time. So what we thought was objectively real in the Newtonian age is not anymore what we think is objectively real, scientifically speaking, after Einstein. So do we really have the naive belief that we know it all right now? Why? What would lead you to that conclusion? In my mind, it is the human mind's urge, need, desire to find some security, find some safety in certainty. We are looking for some ground to stand on when there is no solid ground here. It's just stories made up so that we can have this idea that we know what's going on. The human mind will grasp at straws and reject what doesn't fit a certain story, a certain mold, so that we have this experience of certainty, that I know what's going on. Anyways, so our culture today conditions the experience of materialism as reality, teaches, conditions us to experience individuality as real, that this solid, separate self, this idea of Ben, is objectively real. This is only a story. It will only ever be a story. Just like the United States, the land that we're on, is a story. It's land. It's mountains and rivers and grass and fields and beaches. It's what makes it America is only a name and a label that we choose to agree upon. Same with this. What makes us Ben is a label that we choose to agree upon. What this is beyond that is creation itself. Although at a deeper sense, that's also just a label. It's empty. It's whatever you make it. So just realizing that individualism and this sense of what is real is the self. That's a conditioned notion. And again, as the Buddha said, Ehipasiko, come see for yourself. Sit in meditation, let the mind slow down, and see what's real. With this self, for instance, if we sit in meditation, sit in stillness, we can see all of the moments when the self is not present. When I'm lost in thought, or when I'm just like daydreaming, or when my mind is very still. Is there a self here? Only when I recollect myself is there the experience of this self. It's a story that's constructed. We can poke holes in this story throughout our experience, throughout our days. Everyone has these moments. We just don't recognize them, and we don't have the conceptual framework to understand what's going on. How this experience of self is built by mind, and we just basically have these moment-to-moment experiences where there's a self. I'm making the story where there's a self to interact with people, to interact with the world. Yes, that's useful. But what about all the times when there isn't a self? Are we assuming that there is a self here all the time? Again, why would we make that assumption? Can we make that leap? Again, just come see for yourself. This is all available if you desire to do these practices, to learn these different ways of seeing things. And again, so materialism, individualism, and finally what I would call scientism, which is different than science itself. It's this belief and notion that science is the only thing that can explain reality. Putting the infinite complexity, infinite potential of reality into this very small box called science. What is observable through the scientific method, replicatable. This is a narrow window to explain everything. Considering there's quite a bit that we don't yet understand, there's quite a bit that we can't explain. Why would we say that science figured it all out? Again, to me, that seems like a naive human belief. Again, the deep desire to have some certainty is hijacking our mind and causing us to push rationality to the side in exchange for, oh, we know what's going on. And this feels good because we know for sure. Don't tell me anything that doesn't fit this mold, because I just want to be certain that this is how it is so that I can rest. Little do you know that this belief in certainty, this assumption that we know what's going on, is actually a cage. And it's trapping us, and it's keeping us from progression, keeping us from growth. When we open to the not knowing mind, the mind will flow, the mind will grow on its own, because we're exploring what works. So we have materialism, individualism, scientism. These are just some of the hallmarks of modernity. This is the way of seeing that has conditioned us. That is the air that we breathe, the water we swim through. It's so real that we just don't question it. We assume, oh, this is objectively how things are. Is it? And how do we know? And is there a difference between what we're told and reality? What informs our notion of reality? This gets very deep to this question of how do we know anything? I mean, this is getting a little too deep for this talk, but what gives us the notion that there's truth in anything we hear? This is a valid question to ask. Is it because some dude's wearing a lab coat, or he's got a suit on, or he's really confident when he speaks? Is that it? What about listening to our bodies and the knowing that is held in the soma, in the body? The knowing of the reality of things, the peace in every moment. The body knows this. And I want to go to this quote by one of the Buddha's disciples, Nagarjuna, who was an incredible Buddhist teacher. He said, "Peace is the ultimate reality." Again, Nagarjuna said, peace is the ultimate reality. So any way of seeing things, any view that invokes an experience that is anything other than peace is fabricated. It's a delusion. It's made up in mind. It's a story that we tell ourselves that is not really how things are. So when we hold that to be true, as Nagarjuna said, peace is the ultimate reality. If we are holding on to any views about what we are as human beings, what this world is, what life is, what death is, the stories in our lives, any story that we are holding on to that's causing us suffering is rooted in delusion and just not seeing things clearly. And when we see this, we can ask the question, what am I not seeing clearly? What assumptions do I have about my life, about the world, who I am, what I am, that is just going unquestioned? Again, what assumptions are going unquestioned that I just assume to be, oh, this is how things are, and life is just hard? It's not. It is what you make it. So if you make it hard, it is. And if you make it beautiful, easy, loose, it's that. And there is no wrong answer. I will never say that there is, because there's a beauty in the struggle. There's a beauty in the chaos and the confusion. But again, that's for a different talk. So, again, there are certain ingrained, conditioned, solidified ways of seeing ourselves, our world, and our lives that are causing the mental health crisis. It's not objectively based on fact or what we call reality. It is a conditioned experience based on ways of seeing things, views, perspective, and these are all malleable and workable. So the mental health crisis is just a crisis of perspective, a crisis of ways of seeing. And if we tap into what many mystical traditions have said, including Buddhism, there is no objective world, truth, you. It is only what you make it. So then we have the freedom to explore different ways of seeing ourselves in the world that, again, lead to peace, freedom, liberation, openness, beauty, depth, that aren't cages. And we're not falling for the illusion that there is only one way that things are. As the Buddha said, ehi passiko, if you don't believe me, come see for yourself. There's practices I could teach you, other teachers could teach you, so that you see this for yourself. You don't have to listen to me. That's what I've seen. It's at this point, I don't listen to people. I've seen it. You don't have to question it. I don't need to find the answers from anybody else. What I'm pointing to in particular is emptiness. There is, again, no way that things are beyond the mind. The world and we and us, we do not exist from our own side, as they say. The world doesn't exist from its own side. It's dependent on our minds to construct what we experience as the world. It does not exist on its own side. It's dependent on our minds and our relationship to it, our story about it. It's all fluid. There's a lot of freedom in this. Oh, I'm going to move over so I get more sun. Okay, so the mental health crisis is a disease of the psyche, and its solution has to be the creation of new stories, new ways of seeing things, new ways of seeing ourselves, new ways of seeing this world, our story in it, what it means to be a human being. Is it just materialism, individualism, scientism? Is that what is real? If we believe that, what's the impact? I firmly believe that holding the views of modernity are absolutely a vital part of the mental health crisis. When we hold these views, it's not good for the mind. The mind is actually telling you something. Creation is actually telling you something. Don't stay with this view. Don't stay with this way of seeing things. It hurts. And again, as Nagarjuna said, peace is the ultimate reality. We don't have to settle for this way of seeing. When there's pain present, when there's suffering present, let's keep looking for different, more beautiful, more liberating ways of seeing things. And this is what the mental health crisis is telling us. We need to explore different ways of seeing things, different ways of relating to what we call life. Because again, it's all just a story that we make up. And once everyone believes a certain story, there's too much momentum. Unless, again, we pull back, engage in a practice like meditation, where we simplify to an incredible degree. Simplify, slow down, so we can see clearly what is going on, what is real. And when there's too much speed in the culture, people don't have that time to reflect. And all of a sudden, no one knows what's good. And I'm here trying to tell people, again, this is me trying to help. This is like at this point, it feels like something's coming through me. It's like I see so much suffering. Having been in the grips of crippling anxiety and depression, and having found a way out, having found a grasp of emptiness, I want to give this to people. And I'm telling you, it's not something you have to wait lifetimes for. I can show you this. I'm just saying, I can show you this soon. You can learn this. You can start to grasp this quickly. You can start to do practices to slow down the mind and again see it for yourself. So again, the mental health crisis is a crisis based on ways of seeing, based on perspective. So again, if peace is the ultimate reality according to Nagarjuna, then why do 1 in 10 Americans experience major depressive disorder every year? Why do 1 in 5 experience an anxiety disorder every year? Again, because we're not seeing things clearly. We're seeing things based on a view that is rooted in delusion. And I'm saying that confidently. I wish I could take questions, honestly. It's a matter of time. But yeah. So again, we're trapped in a culturally conditioned, delusional experience of what we call reality. This reality being something solid and unchanging. It's just the way things are. It's again the air we breathe, the water we swim through. And when we hold this view of reality that's solid and unchanging, we're trapping ourselves in this cage of solidity that is actually really unpleasant to the psyche and to the mind. It's very contractive, actually. And actually, it's rooted in fear. I don't want to get too deep into that, but when we're scared, we contract ourselves in reality. And we create a cage for ourselves. Again, the fear of groundlessness, for instance, inspires us to construct the belief of certainty that there is an objective way things are. It's called science, it's called materialism and individualism. That's obviously how things are. Don't tell me any other way because you're crazy. Again, we're constructing this illusion of a ground, something to stand on, something where the mind can settle, because we're uncomfortable with groundlessness. And I will tell you that there's nothing inherently uncomfortable about experiencing groundlessness, experiencing emptiness, actually. It's just our relationship to it. The feeling of groundlessness is different than the feeling of certainty and solidity. It doesn't mean it's objectively harder. It's just different than what we're used to. And if we practice sitting in the experience of groundlessness, of emptiness, we inevitably will change our relationship to it and say, not that bad. I don't have to construct an experience of solidity, of world, of self, of story. I can sit in the fluidity of it all and have agency, have ultimate control, actually, where I don't have to trap myself in any one way of seeing things. So again, when you hold this view, I hope you can realize the freedom in it, and how our views that are linked to suffering are one way of seeing things. And it can be a useful practice to actually ask ourselves, what am I assuming to be real right now? About myself, about the world, what I need? Do I need this job, this partner? Do I need air to breathe to be happy? And that's a valid question. This might seem crazy to some people, but is that a requirement in order to feel real content? Really, deep contentedness and happiness and peace? Do I need to live? I mean, I would say no. In Buddhism, the goal of Buddhism is actually a happiness, a contentedness, a joy, a peace that's not dependent on any conditions. Having a certain partner, having a certain amount of money, having a certain lifestyle, having air to breathe are all conditions. We can find happiness not dependent on anything, not dependent on any conditions, not dependent on living tomorrow. And that's a fact. We need to know that this is possible in order to take the steps to grow in this direction. If we say there's no way, then there isn't. We are creators in the truest, deepest sense. And if we say that there's no way I can find a happiness beyond conditions, then we have created an experience in a world where that's true in a relative sense. And if we say, oh, I think that's possible, to be deeply liberated, free of this world, to be free of the need for a certain partner, a certain lifestyle, a certain security, I don't need it, to be deeply content, happy, at peace. When we say that that's possible, it is. So again, just noticing our stories, our empty, made-up stories, and realizing who makes the limits, who makes the glass ceilings. Could it only be us, perhaps? And when we see this firsthand, again, ehibasiko, when you see this for yourself, how we create our own limitations, do we want to keep making them? And again, this takes a certain degree of awareness and mindfulness to zone into our experience, to see it clearly, and be like, where are my assumptions? Where are my limitations? Where are my glass ceilings? So this is all a practice, but just, again, full circle. The mental health crisis is a crisis of perspective, of ways of seeing. We create our ways of seeing, although they are conditioned and there's a lot of momentum in certain stories. That does not make them objectively true. We make truth. There's no such thing as objective truth in this relative world. It is what you make it. So again, to finish, I want to say that any suffering, and this is according to Buddhism too, any suffering at all, any sort of discontentedness, any anxiety, any fear, whatever it is a product of delusion, of not seeing things clearly. So when we shine the light of our awareness onto the darkness of our lives, what is left? Imagine just a black room. You shine a flashlight. There's nothing in it. There's nothing. There's nothing to be afraid of except for fear itself. Fear is what makes us look away. And when we look away, we can't see clearly what's going on. We can't see clearly this life. And thus we construct monsters based on our uncertainty, based on our experience of not knowing, of not seeing clearly. See how this is a feedback loop. The more we look away and create monsters, the more we have a reason to look away. And it starts by just paying attention to our experience, to looking directly at the monsters of life, shedding our awareness on these big scary things, death, lack, pain, failure, looking at them clearly so that they dissolve on their own. My name is Ben. This was, again, just a little video on the mental health crisis from, I guess, a predominantly Buddhist lens, although, I dabble in various mystical traditions. And, the mental health crisis is a crisis of perspective, ways of seeing, how we solidify a certain story. I want to say that we can be free of it relatively quickly. And I know that to be true. This is my own experience, and it's my goal to teach people how to do this. So if you have questions, concerns, hit me up on Instagram at duffdaddy100, DUFFDADDY100, or leave a comment here or DM me. I don't know if you can even do that on YouTube, but get in touch with me if you feel called to do so. I love to connect with people. Thank you.